I'd like to welcome all the participants, and I'd like to say all protocol observed. And if it is whatever time of the day you might be joining us today, we know that you could have been somewhere else, but you've yielded the call to join us for this dialogue today, the 6th of July, 2021, happening at 10 o'clock UK time and 11 o'clock South African time, and with the topic of traditional leaders and civil society dialogue on the situation in Eswatini. We appreciate you. We are honored to have you. And in the organizations that have set up the event today, my name is Royal Highness Phokazi Simandla, who serves in the Aido South African Chapter Board and also participates in the Heritage and Cultural Committee. For the Aido Network is a non-political organization that embraces all cultures and tribes and religions with the perspective of working together with all the entities in the respect of international human rights as it was developed by the United Nations and Africa Union. Aido today has partnered with Action for Conflict and Transformation, which is a non-profit organization that works with communities and their organizations, as well as institutions and individuals with the view to transform conflict and to build peace. Today promises to be a good engagement. I come in as a servant to learn and as a moderator that has been selected today, and I'll take you through the program. But for the opening remarks, as I say bayete to His Royal Highness Paul Eganda, who is the chairperson of Aido International, I will ask him to come in and do the opening remark and welcome everyone. His Royal Highness Paul J. Eganda is the president of Aido. He's the founder and chairman of the organization. He's a global chief of Embo Kingdom. He's also the Prince of Soma. He's the current president, as mentioned already, of Aido Network. He's a human rights advocate, a campaigner, and an activist against slave trade, with a record of successful rescue and intervention missions within the African government. I could go on, as his accolades and his intervention and his love for the African people is a page longer than what I've just read. And with that, we'd like to welcome His Royal Highness Paul Eganda, to welcome all the dignitaries that have joined us today and everyone else who has an interest in the topic that will be covered today. Over to you, Your Royal Highness. Bayet.
Bayet, Your Imperial Majesties, King Bongane III of Embo, His Royal Majesty King Robinson Tani of Cameroon, King Godwin Bebe of Ogale, Nigeria, River State, Your Royal Highness Papa Sande Emolot, Ateker Iteso, Your Royal Highness Nana Enoch Aboche of Ghana, Your Majesty King Zilikazi, Chief Michael Okwalinga Teso, Your Imperial Majesty Queen Sheba Desad, Queen Grace Eganda, Your Excellencies, the ambassadors participating in this virtual dialogue, distinguished representatives of civil societies organizations, in particular, Venecia Govenda, Comrade Manda Shatayo of Swaziland Justice Forum, Comrade Wandilu Ndulu of Pudemo, Miss Colette Leto-Jane of Human Rights Group South Africa, Bishop Paul Verlaine, Honorable Bernard Miko from the Nigerian National Assembly. Ladies and gentlemen, we, Aido Network International, in partnership with Action Support Center, are honored and pleased to be called upon to convene this very important visual dialogue on the troubled situation in one of Africa's surviving valuable political and cultural institutions, the Kingdom of Eswatini. We respectively greet His Royal Highness King Swati III and welcome his accepting to have these family discussions of issues affecting us all, Africans, wherever we are. As the president of Aido Network International, an organization whose objective is to encourage the revival, promotion, and the preservation of our traditional cultural values and institutions, it is with a heavy heart that I come to chair this meeting today. We can't remain indifferent to the news lately reaching us from Eswatini. Our king and his people have had differences on how life, brotherhood, fatherliness, and Ubuntu, in short, should be lived. King Swati's people have lost lives which could have been saved. Neither the king, his people, nor any of us here wish the situation to deteriorate. Your Royal Majesties, Royal Highnesses, and distinguished participants, I address this sad call and appeal to all the parties concerned in the Kingdom of Eswatini to pause just for a while to hear us, your brothers and sisters, wailing in pain, agony, and shame. It is a shame because after the dismantling of the apartheid regime in South Africa, a people are harming themselves and incurring scores of death. On this critical matter of a people and their king, our ruler, I call on this conference, dialogue of traditional rulers and civil societies to employ both His Royal Highness King Swati III and the great people of Eswatini to come together as a nation in the interest of all humanity and fraternal justice. We wholeheartedly call for a dialogue. Let us not engage in condemning our fault finding as much as possible. We are Africans. We are more for equity than acrobatic Western justice. We must reconcile our differences as one people. Kingdoms and royalties beautifully exist today in Buganda, Ashanti Kingdom in Ghana, in Britain, Denmark, Japan, and elsewhere, with the queens and kings harmoniously living with their contented people. We as Aidoers champion good governance, human rights, and the rule of law. These are the fundamentals left to us by our ancient ancestors, such as Emperor Sundiata Keita of the Great Mali Empire in 2035 with the Kurukan Fuga Charter. The English Magna Carta was precisely in the same spirit. A loved king rules for the good of his people. Long live the Kingdom of Eswatini. Your Imperial Majesties, Royal Highnesses, Excellencies, distinguished participants, leaders of civil societies, on this particular dialogue, I would like us to come as a family to address this issue. Our first intervention as a civil society is to go to our elders, the traditional rulers who we believe are our fathers. Parents do not kill their children. Parents guide their children. We, as Aido, we shall not sit and observe. Our first intervention is to the kings. This is why today we have summoned kings from all over Africa of high reputation, ex-presidents, and political leaders to come here as a panel to address this issue. By the end of this dialogue today, we would like to come with a summary which will lead to resolutions with their vote, with their mandate. Aido Network International, with our partners all over the world, would take appropriate actions based on the recommendations of today. Ladies and gentlemen, I pass back the microphone to our moderator, Sifokazi Mandla, to give us guidelines for this meeting. But I request you, let's respect our elders. Let's respect everybody's opinion. Question time will be given. Together, we are together. Together, we are stronger. Bayete. Bayete.
Bayete.
Bayete, 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 bayete.
That before we start with the program, or I take you through the guidelines for engaging in the program, I would just like to request that we observe a minute of silence for the souls that have departed in the past 2 weeks, and whether the number is 23 or 50, one soul that passes on is one soul too many. And therefore we should honor and give respect to that. If I may ask that I'll observe that moment of silence, and when we finish, then I will carry on with the program. Thank you. Just as a form of guideline for the room, the Zoom room can accept up to a maximum of 100 people. We are also live on YouTube, and we will share the link. So should we go past the number of 100, or we've still got some people that will that might be joining that we will share the link, and we will redirect people also to YouTube. So by no means feel that if you cannot come into the room. At the moment, we're sitting with participants of about 70, and we still thinking that there'll be more people joining. So if it comes to a place where we fill up the room, do know that we do have an overflow on YouTube, and the link will be shared on the chat platform, and all the other people that would like to attend will then be redirected to YouTube. For the program today, we have 2 sets of panelists. We have a session 1 and a session 2, and we'll be having Ms. Venetia Gavenda, who is from Social Justice and Solidarity Activist, giving us the background and the purpose for this meeting. And following on, we will start up with the civil society and religious organizations. In that panel of civil society, we have Ms. Colette Letlojane, we have Bishop Paul Verrein, we have Janet Zoe, we've got Mr. Mandla Hlachwayo, we've got Mr. Wandile Zuzu, and we've got Mr. Martin Wayman. All the people that will be participating after Madam Venetia Gavenda, I will give you a brief detail about them. As we are all family, it is always good to get to know each other, as we might be able to do more things together. Just a bit of a background on Madam Venetia Gavenda. She has a legal background, a LLB degree and is a former director of a human rights committee and has been a public servant since 1994. She is well experienced and well-sourced and a developed network within civil society, business, and political parties. She has experience as a facilitator, a trainer, a strategic thinker, and she also has a long-standing experience in executing programs and projects. And with that, we're going to ask Madam Governor to then take over the platform and take us through the background and the purpose of this meeting. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you very much, Sipokazi, and good morning to everyone, distinguished guests, civil society leaders, especially from Swaziland. This is quite an honor and a privilege, and I thank you all for making the time. I also thank you for having me on the platform. I have been working on solidarity for countries in the region, in the SADC region, for a number of years now, over 20 years. Swaziland has always been a country that I've been engaged in for a while. I think for this platform, what I would like to say is that over the last 2 months, all of us have become a little bit more engaged with the issue of Swaziland. We've seen a lot more information coming from the Kingdom of Swaziland, and particularly around the kind of disturbance, civil disobedience, ongoing protests that have overtaken the country. Eswatini, we know, is one of the last absolute monarchs on the continent, population of approximately 1 million, a little landlocked country that's surrounded by South Africa in a number of ways. And the issues in Swaziland haven't only come up in the last 2 months. I mean, it's been a number of years now where parties have been banned, where civil society have been very seriously trained in terms of their own performance, in terms of even just having a kind of freedom of access to speech in Eswatini. The last 2 months, the situation turned quite drastically, where it started out in a demonstration by students, and one of the students was shot and killed. And from there on, the demonstrations didn't stop, and it's continued right up to yesterday as well as today. 2 weeks ago, the army being unleashed onto the street, and the result of that has been close to 60 people that have been killed and injured in Eswatini. Young people mainly. The army has been said to go from door to door, but I'm going to leave some of those details for our guests who are from Swaziland to give us a little bit more insight into what is happening. One of the big issues that came out of the demonstrations, and one of the big calls, and in fact all those who participate in the demonstrations, has been the call for democracy. So it's not just been about for service delivery or a call for a changed lifestyle in Swaziland or Eswatini. There's been a very deliberate call. In fact, I think from all the petitions that have gone from community to community, the first call was for a democratic society, a democratic dispensation, and the people of Eswatini want some space of their own to be able to elect their government, their leadership. Now, that being the case, together with Action Support Center, we felt it extremely important to be able to hear from the likes of traditional leaders across the continent, to understand what is firstly going on in Eswatini, and for them to be able to provide us with their own sense or perspective of how they see or how they understand the circumstances there. There are a number of key issues that have come up over a while, especially the last 2 months. The questions that we hope some of you would first take forward, not necessarily respond to all of them, but be able to take it forward, is what is the role of monarchs in this on our continent, where there are increasing calls for different types of governance with a direct involvement of citizens in those countries. Are there events, do you see the events in Eswatini as reflective of maybe some of the pitfalls that the traditional authorities have not considered, have failed to take into account? Or is it just limited to Eswatini and that specific area? Or do we see this kind of call for democracy across the continent becoming more of a rallying cry? And then be able to look at whether there can be a peaceful coexistence between a system which is all-controlling, as in the case of Eswatini, and a democratic system. Is there a prospect for the two to be able to engage in some sort of harmonious sense in a place like Eswatini? But to maybe end is to say that the most immediate call, both from within the country and I think outside the country, is for a cessation of violence. And I have to depart in my last point in saying that there hasn't been a case, or there hasn't been a single report of protesters that were armed. That in fact the only armed groups were actually the military, and that had been killed were unarmed protesters. That makes it all the more difficult to begin to understand where do we move from here. So that being said, I leave it able platform, and I think with a number of people on the call today, we certainly should get a little further than we are as we begin to have the panel discussion. I want to thank you all for being here, and especially to all those who have taken the time and the traditional leaders. Your opinions are extremely important. It's one of the very first times that we are beginning to engage directly with the constituency of traditional leaders, talking to you about how we as civil society see the issues. We hope you will reciprocate with your own perceptions and what you think forward for Eswatini. I thank you.
Thank you, Madam Governor. And with your key lines where you said, where do we go from here? And where do we move from here with the sensation of violence and unarmed protesters? And that then leaves the bigger job that this meeting and with the leadership that we have in the House will be able to guide and lead us as the fathers of the families that they are into the right direction, with input from civil society and participation from people. As we know, this is not a new fight that has been going on for a while. And someone mentioned in a different engagement and said people are fatigued. They've been in this engagement for a while. So we are cognizant of all the previous engagements and previous inputs that various people have put their lives at stake for. And with that, we're going to move forward to the panel. We're going to introduce all the panelists at one go. And then from there, we'll then ask each of the panel members to then open up and share with us. Madam Colette Letlojane has over 20 years experience in the field of human rights at national, regional, and international level. She's the Executive Director for the Human Rights Institute of South Africa. Madam, if we can ask you to take over the platform as you share with us, exploring the people's expectations from traditional leadership, figures, and institutions. Over to you, Madam.
Good morning. Thank you for the opportunity, Madam Chairperson. His Royal Highness, Royal Highness, dignitaries, excellencies, religious groups, and civil society formations, human rights organizations. It is a privilege for the Human Rights Institute to be part of this very important meeting that has been organized by Aido and Action Support. We appreciate the time provided to us just to highlight our issues that have been on concern to us regarding the situation of human rights in the Eswatini, the Kingdom of Eswatini. We are calling for guidance and support from the traditional leadership that we have in the continent. What has inspired us is that the President of Aido, His Excellency, Royal Highness, is on the Traditional Council, African Traditional Council of many chief traditional leaders in the continent, who is advocating for the voices of African people, and who is making a representation even at the African Union. This year, we are looking at how the African Charter, being the apex human rights instrument that the founding fathers work together to give the people of Africa their rights, and so that the people of Africa do not only rely or depend on the international human rights instruments like the Universal Declaration for Human Rights. So we have the apex regional instrument that has been adopted and ratified by all member states in the continent except Morocco. Swazi is a state party, and in terms of its commitment, they need to have laws, they need to have administrative practices and policies that are in line with rights that are guaranteed. Some of the rights are the right to life, right to freedom of expression, freedom of association, and assembly. However, we know that Swazi citizens are far away from enjoying those basic fundamental rights that are enjoyed all over by people in the world. We have seen how laws are deliberately adopted to restrict participation of citizens to raise their voices, to challenge issues that relate to corruption, maladministration, and to even contribute in the building of the economy of the country. There is no participation of civil society. Political parties remain banned, trade unions, and dissent. Much as we appreciate the institutions of the traditional leaders, they are very important to us, because when we speak about Africa, the language, the identity of the African people must be exalted over and above what we have learned or what has been imposed by the imperialists. We find it difficult to excel or to emulate what we have achieved as African, to draw aspiration, to draw guidance, and to draw support from our own African leaders, because we are even seeing a disregard of the very same laws and principles that are adopted by Africans themselves to serve as solutions to the problems that we have. We tend to believe or draw support or attention from international community, and it is the situation of Swazi is giving us a challenge to do our best to work together to achieve the aspirations that the African Union, the Constitutive Act of the African Union has drafted. It has fought against colonization, it has fought against slavery, it fought against apartheid and separate development. And it's now time for Ubuntu values to be instilled, and for leaders in the continent not to sit and allow citizens to experience massacre. What we are seeing in Swaziland is actually crimes against humanity. And we cannot allow a country to abuse its sovereign status, to close itself from the world and punish citizens for exercising their right in a manner that breaks down the rule of law, that even amount to genocide. And the mechanisms that we have in the continent are also, transferred in what we have, the SADC region leadership. We currently have got the attention that from the SADC organ on politics, defense, and security and cooperation. Although the leadership is engaging through a fact-finding mission, we see that there's little done to consult the civil society, to work with people on the ground, and to hear the voices from the concerned citizens in Swaziland. And also the fact that internet is shut down, people are not able to communicate, freely or in a manner that is raising, attention, that helps people, to be assisted as much as possible. We are concerned about the rights that have been violated, the rights of women, the rights of children, the rights, vulnerable groups as a whole. We do not even know what is happening to people with disability at the state, to people with albinism, the elderly as well, and children. And we know once we have situation crises such as this, sexual violence becomes, common. It becomes a tool that is used against women. We are recommending and suggesting that such violations of human rights be condemned, and the leadership of this forum, also engage the SADC organ on politics, defense, and security, and the SADC chair as well, and the Troika as well, and provide some support. And I think it is possible to have a delegation from this forum that can also be part of the solution in engaging with the citizens, in ensuring that these violations of human rights comes to end. And the citizens have called for change. The citizens have called for democracy that is enjoyed in South Africa, in all the countries in the Southern Africa, in all the countries of the continent, and where we still have traditional, His Highness, His Royal Highnesses, Her Royal Highnesses, persisting, existing in these countries without any challenge that we unfolding in the Swazi. So we are calling for your attention, to draw aspiration for you, to get assistance from you, guidance and support, and for your forum to be visible, and where possible, to even get accreditation from AU level, because once you have accreditation, it's possible for us to engage you more and to understand some of the laws, African provisions that are positive, that will contribute to the development and to the building of the peaceful society based on human rights, because human rights are not a foreign concept in the continent and in Swaziland or anywhere in the continent. They are rights that Africans themselves have contributed. It's just that we Africans, we sometimes feel that our culture or our traditions are suppressed or undermined. However, when you look at all those values in the human rights, you'll see that they have their own origins from Africa themselves. So the tendency of removing ourselves from playing a leadership role by stating that some of these laws are Western concept, but their origin is Africa. So we are calling for your role to assist us engage to end the violence. Many people have died. There's reports that have gone to the UN, They have reports that have gone to the African Commission for the intervention, and the SADC is currently conducting a fact-finding mission, and to ensure that the principles of the SADC, which allow participation of civil society in the regional integration processes, to be respected, and to hear all concerns of civil society and respect the rule of law and human rights in Swaziland. I'd like to end here to provide our Swazi colleagues that are going to be leading and giving the broad perspective of what is going on in Swaziland to do so. Thank you, Madam Chair, for this opportunity.
Thank you, Madam Letlhojane. You've given us a really good perspective from a human rights view, and it hadn't crossed my mind as yet on what has possibly happened with the people living with disability, people dealing with albinism. We look at the current situation we're having, and we forget that lives for other people still need to carry on, and we are the custodians of making sure that everyone is well and able to live their best life. And with that, we are going to introduce Bishop Paul Verheyen, who is the minister of the Methodist Church of Southern Africa, and he was ordained in 1978. He's been a minister for the church for 38 years. He is the superintendent of the Tsietsi Community Center, as well as the district refugee ministries. Over to you, Reverend.
Thank you for the privilege of being a part of this discussion, and I would want to pay respects to all the eminent leadership that is on this platform, and hope and pray that this engagement will lead to a deeper and more refined engagement in terms of the people themselves in Swaziland. May I first of all just express solidarity with those families who've lost loved ones in the most recent violence. One would know that when there is death in a country, as has been in Swaziland over these past days, immediately that happens, our effectiveness as leaders is called into question right across the board, whether we happen to be church, whether we happen to be kings, whether we happen to be traditional leaders. If people die in our time of governance, then we have to question ourselves very, very deeply about meeting the expectations. One of the prime expectations of people of leadership is that they will provide a place of safety. And so I would first of all want to call for, as it were, a ceasefire, because it almost feels to me as if there has been an unleashing of violence and the violation and alienation of human rights in these past few days that has been deeply, deeply, deeply disturbing. And may I just say that, of course, what we have to recognize is that it's not just the violation that has happened in these days that we have to deal with as human beings, but we do know that at the present moment, people in Swaziland are being traumatized hour by hour. People are afraid to go out onto the streets. People are afraid of being eliminated without name, without any sense of human dignity. And it's particularly disturbing that most of the protesters are actually unarmed. And so there is a very profound, unequal distribution of strength and power. It's a deeply, deeply disturbing manifestation. I would pray that all the traditional leaders, kings on this platform, queens on this platform, would be able to converse with one another profoundly in terms of what seems to be the emerging conversation that needs to happen between monarchy and democracy, and ask that consultation, that dialogue goes profoundly into power sharing, economic sharing, so that the transition that must happen in Zimbabwe, not in Zimbabwe, in Swaziland, doesn't leave a perpetuation of distance between the haves and the have-nots, but that in actual fact, the transition brings about a greater integrity and engagement between the haves and the have-nots. And then finally, I would want to plead that there be an immediate cessation of violence, and that all people on this platform emphasize that this way of dealing with our differences is ultimately going to destroy the stability of this entire continent. This is not just an Eswatini problem. It is every single country in Africa's concern. Thank you.
Thank you, Reverend. And as you rightfully say, this is not a Eswatini problem. It is an Africa problem, as it has a potential of destabilizing the whole continent. To the next speaker that is on the program, Mr. Mandla Hlatshwayo. Mr. Mandla Hlatshwayo is a captain of industry. He is an influential political activist in Swaziland over the past 25 years. He is the founding member of the People's United Democratic Movement, UDEMO, which is a political party in the country that does not allow political parties to operate, the country then being Swaziland. He was invited as to be the member of the first Constitutional Review Committee in Swaziland, and a position he refused on the grounds of lack of transparency and credibility of the process. If we can ask you, sir, to take on the platform.
Thank you, Madam Chair. May I start by thanking all these prestigious majesties who are here. It is a real privilege to have the opportunity to actually share our thoughts and pain with...
Babu Hlatshwayo, just 1 second, if I may interrupt. If it's possible for you to switch on your video.
Oh.
Unless if it's going to influence your quality of transmission.
Let's see. Is it working?
Yes, sir.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I would like just to give a bit of a background to the evolution of the royal family in Swaziland, which takes us to the current crisis. In that effort, I will attempt to be brief. Here, I just want to first indicate that after more than 500 years of exploitation and abuse of indigenous people by colonialists, the dawn of independence was a great moment for every African. And in the case of Swaziland, the king then was Sobhuza, who was very keen to become an executive monarch. In the early debates, in fact, two of his relatives, Prince Dumisa, Princess Betusile, fought him very hard against this idea that he should be an executive monarch. Their view was that the people of Swaziland must choose their own government, and that a king must separate himself from political posturing so that he will remain genuine to the desires and aspirations of his people. Unfortunately, the two failed to persuade Sobhuza. As a result of that, Sobhuza formed his own political party. And that political party is what he took to the first elections in Swaziland in 1968. The elections were successful, the first elections for the king, because he won all the seats in the House of Assembly. In the next election, which took place in 1972, the king saw something that he had never imagined was possible. The biggest constituency, which was the southern constituency, which was really made up of the industrial areas, they actually put in, for the first time, 3 members of MPs which were from the opposition. This, for the first time, seriously challenged the royal family, because they could see that over time, they could actually be voted out of office. It was at that point that in 1973, Sobhuza decided to basically conduct a coup and issue a state of emergency, ban political parties, and remove the rights of ordinary Swazis to have freedom of association or even freedom of expression. This battle then basically moved from 1973 up to when the current king was appointed and eventually coronated in 1986. He built upon these oppressive mechanisms through which our old oppressors, the colonialists, ruled the country. If you were to look at the instruments of state that are being used to actually silence the people, crush their rights to be able to have a voice in their own society, they date back to the colonial times. They were the same rules, laws that the colonialists were actually using. What this has actually done in Swaziland is that it has produced a very unique monarch in Africa. A monarch that owns the government, a monarch that controls more than 60% of the economy. You can take every major sector in the Swazi economy. The biggest sector is sugar. Swaziland produces around 40 to 45% of the sugar that is produced in South Africa. And as a result, Swaziland controls more than a third of the South African sugar industry market. Of that, the value that is driven out of sugar, more than 55% of it is personal business for the king. You have a situation whereby the land and resources under the land, they provide no value to the development of the people of Swaziland. They are value only for the king and his family. So over time, you will now have a situation where this absolute monarch has emerged as a super rich king, living in a very flashy palaces, glittering in gold and silver. We have his children wearing watches that can pay school fees for many schools in Swaziland. You have the king with jets of a size that not many African leaders have or countries have in our continent. This has actually separated the king from the aspirations of his own people, because he's in competition with them over the resources of the state. You have a king that has executive power. He is the one that appoints cabinet. He appoints the judges. He appoints 20 of the 30 members of Senate in the Swazi parliament. He is the one that dictates the business of government. He determines the priorities of government. He determines his own budget. This, I just want to use it as the foundation for the cries of the ordinary people of Swaziland. You have a youth, 60% of it, which is unemployed. You have poverty in Swaziland of a magnitude that does not relate to the economic performance of the country in terms of its own wealth. What this has done is to basically give us a king whose philosophy is at variance with the aspirations and needs of the people. And the current situation that we're dealing with is a culmination of many years of frustration, of bottling up, of watching this dichotomy, where people can now see that they are poor not because their country is poor. They are poor because one man does not have the interests of ordinary people. His real interest is that of his family. So when this trigger took place, that led to the current crisis, you have a situation whereby the anger can no longer be contained by the tricks of the past. You have a situation where the demand that people are actually having is so basic that it is difficult to actually understand why the king can only respond with fire. The demands that people are actually making is to have the power to elect a government of their own choice, is to have the right to determine the affairs of the Swazi state, is to take him out of the playing field, because as the leader of politics in Swaziland, the results that we're having are not one that any Swazi really wants. The area where, as ordinary Swazis, we are hugely frustrated is that the greed, the royal greed, has not in any way been curtailed by the accumulation. The king wants more. We have communities in Vuvulani who have been on land which is very productive in Swaziland. The king has been fighting them over the years, and they are being evicted in order for the king to expand his sugar interests. You have thousands of communities that are being removed from their land in order to expand the king's business interests. It is in this kind of situation whereby it is in this kind of situation whereby the philosophy of what a king is seriously challenged in terms of the experience of the youth in Swaziland. And it is the same environment whereby we're keen to see traditional leaders of Africa standing up and telling us as ordinary citizens as to what should be the response where a king will actually embark on genocide and kill 75 people, where is the justice for those people? We started off with a moment of silence for the departed. These are not departed. These souls were violently removed from society. They can't be peaceful wherever they are. We would like to hear the voice of traditional leaders and kings of Africa as to what do they say, what does our religion and philosophies say is the responsibility of a king in a situation like this? How do we hold a king accountable for such genocide? It is these questions to us that are really troubling in terms of where is the place of a king, whether is in rebuilding the Swazi society and the Swazi state. Where do you place the king, and what do you do with the crimes that have been committed? And we also want to hear why is it inappropriate for our majesties to condemn their own when he's doing something that's unacceptable. We are indeed a peaceful nation, but we are not stupid people who have to accept even things that are glaringly wrong. Sobhuza, the father of the current king, used to warn the Swazis that there's a difference between being peaceful and being stupid. These were his words, not mine. We want to respect the Swazi royal family, but we do not believe it is respecting itself. I will want to pause because this is a dialogue. I don't want it to be a monologue, but we are at pains with the atrocities that have been committed. The demands that civil society and ordinary people are making are ones that we hope the kings and queens of Africa will stand up to support. We also hope and pray that you will be true to the values of what kings are. In Swaziland, we used to believe that a king is the sun that will shine even at a murderer's house. It doesn't discriminate. The sun that we currently have only shines for its own family.
Thank you, Babu Hlatshwayo, for that background and for opening up our eyes to some of the things as people who are not on the ground that we might be missed or might have taken for granted. And as you pose the question to the room and you say, what is the philosophy of what a king is? Looking at what has happened in Eswatini, what should it be now? And that is a deep question that I think is left lingering for all of us to ponder through. And the grace of being in this room is that we do have a people that could give us insight and would guide us in what they do in times like this. I just want to pass on a comment to people that we have reached full capacity on the Zoom platform. I have checked on the YouTube platform as well. There are people who have logged in, and we thank you. Our technical team is monitoring both platforms. And so you can be able to drop a comment or a question. What we will do with comments and questions, we will not take them per speaker. We will allow a panel to finish. And once we have gone through those, then it will make it easier to be able to group the questions and then ask either per speaker or the relevant panelist to then provide us with input. So one of my recommendations, I have already seen people who have placed comments on the group. We ask that you just indulge us in that process that we are applying, and to make sure that we have a fair view of the comments that are put in and the questions, and we also redirect them as they'll be best applied. Madam Jeanette, I've just been informed by the technical team is struggling to connect, is having technology challenges. So as and when she logs in, we will allow her the slot to then bring us a contribution. And she is from the Southern Africans People's Solidarity Network. We will move on to the next speaker, Mr. Wandile Zuzu, who's from Pudemo in Eswatini. He is the Secretary General of the organization. He's the National Coordinator of the Swaziland United Democratic Front, which is an umbrella body of pro-democracy forces. He is the former president of Swayoko, the Youth League of Pudemo. He has worked closely with the late President Mario Masuku for many years, and he is also the former national organizer of Swaziland National Union of Students. Babu Dludlu, we are happy that you are in our midst and you're about to share a part of what you have experienced and give us light into what we might be missing. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Madam Program Director. May I pass my warm greetings on behalf of Pudemo and the Swazi people to their majesties, to the religious leadership of the church, the leadership of civil society, as well as all esteemed guests who are part of this discussion. Thank you very much for giving us this opportunity to ventilate our views and also pass our cries as Africans to our own African sisters and brothers. Comrade Mandla Hlachwago and all other presenters before me have done a wonderful job in giving us an expose of both who we are as Africans and as Swazis, as well as what we ought to do. Program Director, I will start by making a very brief picture of the last 2 months. Then I will go into our plea to African traditional leaders, the church, as well as civil society in the region, as well as, of course, how do we look at the way forward. The struggle we are speaking about is not 2 months old. It's way over 4 decades of a struggle for self-determination, self-rule, which is the same struggle that our forefathers waged against colonialists of British origin as well as Boer origin in the early 1800s, coming up to 1968, where Swaziland officially got her independence. But the speakers before me have done justice on that. I will simply say the last 2 months show a culmination of a frustration of youth in the general poor, oppressed Swazi, as well as a struggle for democracy, where through that structure Swazis would afford an opportunity to elect their own government, which will also speak to the cabinet. a right that they have been deprived since the 12th April 1973, which today accounts for almost 48 years, where the monarchy illegally and irrationally usurped power, which immediately changed the institution of the monarchy itself. We have seen a struggle again, which is an expression of a frustration around poverty, which did display itself in a form of looting, which we do not necessarily encourage, but the reality is the reality, especially with the advent of COVID-19 at the beginning of last year. And Swazi is living in a situation where government doesn't provide for even the barest of support in terms of food, as well as basic needs that they have not then been able to source for themselves, courtesy of a huge loss of jobs because of COVID, as well as just an exacerbation of very hard conditions, has culminated and poured out of line the kind of anger we have seen in the last 2 months. This, of course, was sparked by a simple call for justice after the mysterious death of a student by the name of Thabani Nkomonye, literally 2 months on the 17th of May, if my memory serves me well, where police mysteriously handled the case of this young man, and it raised suspicion to the entire nation that police could actually be responsible. And while that was happening, 3 MPs were quite vocal in Parliament in raising people's issues, as well as this issue in particular. Then constituencies went on a campaign that we love what we see and hear from MP Makaukau, who comes from the Eastern region in a constituent called Sipofaneni. We like the noise we hear from MP Bassett Mabuza, who comes from a constituency in the south. We like what we hear from MP Mthandeni Dube, who comes from a constituency in the east. But why is my MP quiet? Then youth and communities listed up their demands and took them to their constituency to raise first, why are you quiet on justice for Thabani in Parliament? Why are you quiet on the calls for democratic reforms in Parliament? Why are you quiet on unemployment? Why are you quiet on poverty, gender-based violence, and other social ills? This saw a series of petitions almost every day. And most importantly, during weekends, I remember for the last 3 weeks, 3 Saturdays, there would be petitions of about 15, 20 local constituencies being petitioned on the same day. Swaziland has plus minus 60, 59 to 60 constituencies. So people were petitioning their MPs. And as usual, His Majesty through his government was not too happy, neither too pleased with Swazis expressing their anger, Swazis expressing their demands bordering on socio-economic and democracy, lack or absence of democracy. The Prime Minister, Mr. Themba Masuku, came out to officially ban, that is almost 2 weeks ago, ban protests. This then changed the whole program, where police and warders came into the different communities to literally and violently stop people from converging with the mission of going into their constituencies to petition. Then a hullabaloo started from there. It quickly turned out very violent, and quite disturbingly, the king unleashed violence never seen. We have known the king to be violent, to arrest people who disagree with his political system, particularly activists. Comrade Mario Masugu has been well known for being in and out of jail, charged with serious crimes bordering on sedition, treason, and terrorism, merely because he is an advocate for change. And there are many other human rights defenders, lawyers, and journalists who have suffered the same in the last 4 decades. But this time, what was quite shocking is the joint operation of the military and the police, as well as the involvement of a French-speaking nation from up in Africa, who sent literally their army to support His Majesty. And in the process unleashed a very, very violent wave where people have been killed, which as we speak, we have unconfirmed report of plus minus 75 people who have died in the last 2 weeks. We have 250 people who are in different hospitals with injuries of gun wounds, broken limbs, as well as obviously trauma. We have plus minus 600 people who are in jails, arrested, and some of them not even being charged, simply being kept in the different police camps as well as military barracks. Program Director, without taking much of your time, permit me to deal with what we think we want as Swazis. I have already hinted that in the main, it's a call for democracy, it's a call for the respect of human rights, it's a call for the rule of law, it's a call for self-determination, a Swazi nation that would be allowed to have the power that was stolen 48 years ago back to the people, which could be contested through in a democratic parliament. A king that is totally, or a monarchy that is totally not part of the day-to-day running of the country. But with what has happened lately, I'm not too sure the Swazis would still be. I'm not too sure the Swazi people will be will be keen to have a king who has murdered our people in the way it has happened. We have grown even more not to trust him, neither have any iota of faith in him and his family being part of the politics, because each time you don't share the same views as his, you are fit to be killed, jailed, and pushed out of your country. We have more than 600 Swazis who live in exile here in South Africa and many parts of the world. We have many Swazis who are languishing in jail, one of them facing a jail term of 85 years, Amos Mbetsi, as well as many other political activists. The Swazi in particular, Chair, want a king with integrity, as African traditions and customs will dictate. The Swazis look up for a leader who has empathy, as our traditions will dictate. A leader who has humility, a leader who can be held accountable, a leader who has self-awareness, a leader who has emotional diligence, a leader who can listen to his people, even when they say something that he may not like, but he's still required to listen. You need a leader who has a unifier, an embodiment of our people, as we would have believed in the past. A leader who gives our people protection as well as equal opportunities, particularly economic opportunities. In a country that has 47% youth unemployment, in a country where HIV still stands at 26% and is leading globally, in a country where 63% of Swazis live on less than $1 per day. Swazis are merely asking for that. And in response, this is what we have experienced. Our call and our humble plea to their majesties, religious leaders, civil society and business in Africa is simple. We need an immediate call from all of us as Africans that His Majesty King Mswati must stop the violence he has unleashed, the war he has unleashed on unarmed civilians. The army must withdraw immediately from the streets. The army must stop being in private uniform, because we do not know, it's no longer easy to make a difference between a criminal and a soldier and a police. But also, it would be prudent and African for us to call the king to order, especially their majesties. Call to order one of our own. This trend that it's only the Western world that can say something on human rights doesn't help us. It paints a picture of us not necessarily taking serious our rights and defending our own. So it will be our humble plea that a call of order from their majesties on His Majesty, as well as an assistance of an independent commission to investigate the extent of deaths, arrests, injuries, as well as those who are missing, because this has really culminated to a humanitarian crisis. As well as lastly, Chairperson, an all-Africa mission to assist Swazis establish a dialogue, as well as whether a dialogue or a negotiation. But of course, a negotiation can't happen without justice first. We are looking at prospects of taking His Majesty to some body where he can be held accountable, personally accountable for this carnage he has unleashed on our innocent, unarmed Swazi people who were merely calling for a democracy, rule of law, and a respect for human rights. With that said, I invite all of you to a 3 o'clock Pudemo commemoration. Pudemo today turns 38 years of an unbroken struggle against His Majesty's political system called Tingundla, which is nothing but royal dominance and supremacy of the royal house on the Swazi nation and the Swazi people for the last 4 decades. That is where you will get even more in-depth picture of this struggle, and as well as how we look at a way forward. With that, thank you very much once again for your time and patience, Program Director, and all their majesties and leaders in this forum.
Thank you, Mr. Lulu. Thank you for the pleas. I am tempted not to even repeat them because I think you explained them quite eloquently. As you were mentioning the calls that you were doing here, calling for the respect of human rights and calling for an all-Africa mission to Eswatini to start a negotiation or engagement that will allow us to see a new, in South Africa it's called a new dawn, and to see a new way of life or a way forward. We thank you for that. We see the comments that are coming in. We appreciate them. I will not be going through them and reading them, but I can assure you Lauren Matthew, Dr. Janet, Boy, Daniel Monwabu, His Royal Highness, Nana Nyayo, we have Sizagele, all the people that are giving the comments gift. We thank you for the comments, keep them coming. We also do take comments on YouTube, so we are monitoring both platforms, comments and questions. As I explained earlier on, we will not be responding to them immediately, but we will have a Q&A session when all the panelists have shared their opinion or what they've prepared for us today. To finish up on the first session, we have Mr. Martin Wayman, who is part of the Aido Network International, heading up the Human Rights Committee, which is the Ubuntu Committee. And he'll be exploring the concept of Ubuntu in the dispensation of African people's rights and responsibilities. Mr. Martin, I'm assuming you are online. I did see you come in. We'll hand over the platform to you.
Yes, hello. Thank you very much, Madam Moderator. Your Highnesses, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, all protocols observed. I want to thank you all for being here and for this opportunity to present at this meeting and to outline the position and direction that Aido wishes to encourage in finding solutions to the current problems in the Kingdom of Eswatini. Let me say that there are several foundational concepts that we feel are vital to recognize and take on board in order that we may help to bring about a change in conditions for the better. And I have to say many of these have already been expressed, but let me put the Aido perspective here. The first of these is what we in Aido link together, Ubuntu human rights. Ubuntu is an African concept going together with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and also expressed in the Charter of Human Rights, of Human and People's Rights of the African Union. And Aido is developing training along these lines for anybody that is interested to know more. The second is a broad respect for traditions and cultural values. The third, which is closely tied into the second point, is a support for the traditional kingdoms and royalty throughout Africa. Now, some may say that these are in conflict, and they certainly can be, but I would also say that they certainly do not have to be. So I want to go into this some more in order to help lay a foundation for working together in the future. There is no doubt that some traditional practices are in conflict with human rights. This has to be said. And it would apply for any culture of the world. But it does not mean that by broad generalization, all aspects of tradition, of that tradition and culture are bad. And so what we are discussing here, though, is an example of how things have gone so in Eswatini. When a ruler has absolute power over others, there is clearly room for abuse. An absolute dictator can be benevolent, can be a benevolent dictator and may well act for the good of all citizens of his country. But unfortunately, any such system leaves the door open for abuse and corruption. And of course it removes, and this is a key point, it removes the power of choice from each individual to have a say in how the country or a group or a business is run. You could say that businesses are often run as a kind of dictatorship because that may be the most efficient, the most efficient way. However, with countries, this is certainly not a democratic way forward, as it strips from the people of the country from having a representative say. So I do not think that that is an option here, as we obviously want to improve conditions, not perpetuate them. Traditional rulers do have an important role. In fact, we in Aido believe that they have a very important role in the development of Africa. The kings and queens of Africa also represent the culture, the color, the traditional food, the dress, and so many other beautiful aspects of society and many other practices across the continent. So whilst the kings and queens of Africa have a traditional role in maintaining a culture and a people, their people, they also have to take responsibility for looking at traditional or existing practices that are in violation of Ubuntu human rights. They are in violation, where they are in violation of Ubuntu rather than when they are being fixed on maintaining harmful or destructive tradition. So it is their role to recognize this and evaluate these as being harmful. And so instead of perpetuating them, it is time to replace them and take on board practices that demonstrate and imbue Ubuntu, human rights, humanity into their cultures. We can see in the country that is under discussion here that there are many changes to be made. And if we move forward with both these principles hand in hand, respect for the traditions alongside awareness of those practices that are outmoded and need to be replaced with ones that represent respect for one's fellow men and women in a framework of human rights, then we will come to a solution to the problems we are faced with. Aido is non-political. We are not here to say what kind of government a country should have. We believe that it is up to the citizens of the country to determine that. This can only be properly done through other human rights, through the application of human rights standards, such as freedom of speech and freedom of association, amongst other rights. And so by informing the people on the different options of government and letting them decide. But again, it is in a framework of human rights and respect for one another that this direction should be taken. And this means that people should be given a free choice in determining that for themselves. So I call here for all the traditional, all the kings and queens and the rulers of Africa to take these words on board, to look towards advancing their own cultures, their own people, by removing anything that is against these basic Ubuntu human rights principles. And so developing their own cultures in a way that is beneficial and equal for all. And so it is in this spirit that on behalf of Aido, we welcome you all here, and we will do what we can to facilitate a peaceful and positive solution to the existing conflict and problems. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Martin. We are grateful for your sharing and giving us a position that Aido is a non-political organization, and in the spirit of Ubuntu will always be leaning on the side of human rights and making sure all lives are spared and finding the best solution to make sure we coexist. We have come to the end of our first session covered by civil society and religious organization. We are seeing the comments. We will be posting a contact email address that people can share, and if they want to connect with us and for future events that will be happening of this nature, and then we can be able to send them invitations. And also towards the end of the program, we will talk to the summary points of this event, the plans, and what would then be the next steps from here. With that, we might have people that want to be part of the next steps and the next engagements. So I have seen some people who have left their contact details. Please do so. in the group chat. We will collect that. And we will also be sharing Aido network and Action for Conflict Transformations contact details so that we can stay connected to each other and together we can find a solution. We are grateful to all the speakers we have shared and a light of what is happening. And in the true sense of this engagement, we want to generate light and not heat. And therefore, we will always be promoting for a healthy engagement. We are sympathetic and empathetic to the cause and the lives that have been lost. And ours is to find or assist in being part of the solution and being able to dialogue and engage as many people as possible, so that it's not a solution that comes from one person, but it is a group solution. Thank you.
Advocate for unity and social change. Hey. Advocation of human rights to live for better life.